So Alex was born and raised in Rochester, New York. He attended Fairport High School, the University at Buffalo, and the Culinary Institute of America. He worked as a line cook and eventually a kitchen manager for 10 years, and has been a sous chef at the University of Rochester for the past 4 years. In his free time, Alex loves to spend time with friends and family, travel around the world, and volunteer as an ambassador for CHOW. Alex, take it away.
All right, thank you. It's the closest I'll be introduced to the octagon in UFC, so that felt good. Thank you. All right, cool. So I'll get started right into my speech here. I was thinking about having it all down on note cards, but I can ramble quite a bit, so I wrote it all down. It's about 4 pages, so just bear with me here. All right, the harder you fall, the higher you bounce. This quote was written on the chalkboard on a cold November day in 2009. I was in my junior year at Fairport High School, walking into seventh period sociology, taught by Mr. Kyle Hargrave, one of many pivotal teachers and role models throughout my youth. He taught me countless lessons that helped me shape the man I have become today. However, on that day, I had no idea how insurmountable these words would become in shaping the rest of my life. Let's backtrack just a bit in order to paint a more vivid picture. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for having me as a guest speaker tonight. My goal is to illustrate moments of my life that all lead up to this very moment, right here, right now. My story will provide hope and inspiration for those who have struggled or are currently struggling with challenges in life we face each day. With that being said, let's dive into this together. I was born in 1992 in Rochester, New York, eventually residing in the nearby suburb of Fairport. I have to be honest, I had a good childhood. My parents and my younger brother Andrew made up of our immediate family with a number of grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins in the mix. When I was about 3 years old, I fell in love with the game of hockey. There's home video of myself around this age with an entire equipment setup from head to toe in a Wayne Gretzky Los Angeles Kings jersey on Christmas morning. I had just mastered how to walk. How was I supposed to skate? Throughout the rest of my younger years, I played baseball and football between and during hockey seasons. I was taught a lot of discipline as far as staying involved athletically, but more importantly, academically. By the time I graduated high school, I had maintained a 94 overall average. I took an AP psychology class during my senior year, and I was instantly hooked. I applied and was accepted to a handful of schools, but ultimately decided on the University at Buffalo, where my father and eventually my brother also completed their undergrads. I filled my schedule with the mandatory prerequisites and a few 300 level psychology and sociology classes. My absolute favorites were social psychology and urban psychology or sociology. I even became a research assistant in my sophomore year for my social psychology professor as I helped run freshmen through their required experience. We collected social psychophysiology data based on a series of exercises. It was a rewarding experience, but only 18 years old, I proved that I was not really ready for this type of responsibility. I never lost sight of the prize at hand, but the constant partying and the cloud of marijuana that followed me from point A to point B eventually caught up with me. Between the fall and spring semesters of my sophomore year, I began to feel strange. I quickly began to lose my interest in so many things I once loved. I would curl up in a ball and sleep on and off most days. My motivation to keep moving was MIA. My friends and family were pretty concerned with me, but I couldn't give a damn about how they felt. I just wanted to be left alone. I wanted to teleport to the furthest edge of the earth and cry with no one in sight. I scheduled an appointment with my doctor and he prescribed me an antidepressant. But even with a waiting time for this medication to kick in, it never truly ended up helping at all. I didn't even last a full month into my fourth semester at UB. I skipped the majority of my classes and rarely ever got out of bed. Everybody was worried about me, but nobody seemed to care at the same time, which, as you can imagine, was quite conflicting. Many hours of phone calls back home seemed like the only amount of fuel to keep me from breaking down completely on the side of the road. On a cloudy Saturday in February, my dad got in his Ford Explorer and came to the rescue. He helped me move all the stuff I had just moved into a new dorm a few weeks prior, down 4 flights of stairs and I-90 East all the way back home. Brick wall. I had never been so unbelievably embarrassed, ashamed, and emotionally destroyed. I had to accept defeat, throw in the towel, take the L, and move on. My heart shattered into so many pieces. I don't remember much of the ride home. It was good to be back where I could hit the reset button, but I was still in the worst mental state of my life at that time. Eventually, I found a psychiatrist who, over the years, truly saved me. We began to unfold the damage layer by layer, which took many years to really start repairing. Within a few months of deliberation and new medication, I went out and got my first job since high school. Without having much prior experience, I became a prep cook and eventually moved my way up to the line on fry side at Champs Americana. It was an extremely busy restaurant attached to the mall that prided themselves on being a mostly scratch kitchen. I had my first run in with long hours and having my ass handed to me countless times, especially on the fry side on weekends. It sucked. I sucked. But it was the beginning of a long journey throughout this industry. I just didn't know that yet. I was the stereotypical 19-year-old run to the litter, always in the way, typically showing up high, very slow with the prep list, no understanding of how the business works, and thrilled by the constant drama of my coworkers that they would entangle themselves in. To me, it was just a job, but I was able to hang in there for a full, almost an entire year. I definitely honed in on my skills, creating the base of my culinary pyramid. However, after being treated very poorly by my kitchen manager and being thrown to the dish pit more and more often, I just stopped showing up. I left this restaurant and was hired at a restaurant in the village of Fairport called Donnelly's Public House. This was the complete opposite of a large corporate chain as a privately owned but very popular local restaurant. I think the building was over 100 years old, to be honest. I was welcomed with open arms while still being the young kid who needed quite a bit more mentoring. Our chef taught me a lot of useful skills that I still utilize, but I worked much more closely with our kitchen manager, Dave. He nicknamed me Peanut, and at 20 years old, I was more or less the same stoned kid who finally made it out of his teens. I worked closely with about 5 other line cooks that all had wildly different personalities. We made a great team, though, as we kicked ass on Friday and Saturday nights like clockwork. This position at the time of my life was absolutely crucial, and it truly opened my eyes to the endless possibilities of this industry. I started to master the fryers and appetizers and slowly worked my way over to the flat top grill. On my 21st birthday, I worked an opening shift and then returned at night to close the bar down. I had about 9 drinks that coworkers bought for me, and I happily consumed them. The aftermath of that night is a bit of a metaphor for how my employment ended there, but I will always remember this place dearly. I quickly found another job, swinging back to the dark side of the corporate culinary world. Aside from the sign on the front of the building, though, and the mediocre food, you'd never guess it was actually an Applebee's. From our general manager, Josh, all the way down to our cranky rotation of dishwashers, the culture was absolutely beautiful. It felt nice to be loved and appreciated by such a wonderful group of people. Although it wasn't my first rodeo, I was still very young and naive. The growing pains came and went like the rolling hills of the Hudson Valley. I acquired a lot of personal and professional growth over the years here, as this was my first campaign, but we'll get to that later. During the spring and summer, I spent about 60 hours a week landscaping and closing up shop at the Bees on Friday nights. On top of this, I was able to transfer my unused credits from UB to a local program accredited by SUNY Empire. This course called my name, and I began my year-and-a-half journey of night classes twice a week. I was enrolled and working towards my KSAC, or more simply put, a substance abuse counselor in New York State. I was very busy during this time, but highly motivated to close the door on the culinary chapter of my life. I absolutely loved the education I received there. The pace was perfect, I wasn't swamped with homework, and I gained so much priceless knowledge that I still use in my daily life. I received positive feedback throughout the course, and especially during mock counseling sessions. We had many guest speakers, but there will always be one who stood out and ultimately pushed me away from this field. She was a well-seasoned counselor locally for over 30 years and used a step stool to reach the podium. First things first. If you do not seek mental health counseling at least once a week, you will burn out within the first 5 years of your career. I guarantee it. Secondly, it is not if you will have clients who overdose or commit suicide, it's when. Does anyone have any questions? You could hear a pin drop from down the street. On the surface level, I brushed it off completely, but over the next few months, it ate away from me from the inside out. I ended up with only 345 of the 350 required classroom hours and opted out of the exam to receive my training certificate. Brick wall. Within a year of this terrifying speech, the heroin epidemic in Rochester tripled. I beat myself up initially. It was the second point in my life where I'd chosen to give up. I was sad and upset with myself. However, I know that I dodged a bullet here. I'm more than certain I would have helped and saved hundreds of people over the years, but each tragedy I faced would have ultimately destroyed me beyond repair. It hurts to say it even to this day, but I made the right decision to walk away from a career that I had just started to love. I returned full time to the bees after landscaping season had ended. I carried the negativity of turning my back on my future heavily in quicksand. My closing shift started to feel like a string of mediocrity. My alcohol and marijuana usage began to climb as my bar tabs after we locked the doors remained quite inexpensive. However, whatever money I had been saving each night was spent at another bar with my coworkers. The poor decisions continued into a gradual decline of my state of mind as I started packing on the pounds. The endless rut continued until I completely spiraled into the absolute darkest period of my life. I'll read the following excerpt I wrote down a year after the madness. I had been described as a roller coaster on fire. My life was spiraling out of control. I had decided to take myself off my antidepressants and thyroid medication I had been on for years. I entered a very crazed and delusional manic state. My emotions were powerful, my actions were unbelievable, and I had a constant rush of energy. My life began to slowly unravel. My behavior at my second job caused me to be terminated. I drove to DC to hide out with my cousin for a few days after an altercation with my younger brother. I tried to date many different girls at the same time with the hopes of just finding one. At the time, it was just a numbers game, simple probability. My life was on fire and my skin was starting to burn. The night before August 26, 2015, I finished up my work and drowned my sorrows at the bar. I had way too much to drink, and I sat with the key in the ignition, crying uncontrollably. I hated myself. I hated who I had become. Sadly, the next thing I remember was getting sick in a parking lot about 20 minutes away. I blacked out behind the wheel. I could have killed somebody. To this day, I still can't believe I did something so stupid. I then made a suicidal Facebook post and pulled out a bottle of trazodone I had been prescribed a while back. I knew with the amount of alcohol in me, downing even a few pills would have done the trick. I opened the bottle and was about to empty out all of them when I saw a bright set of headlights. A security guard in his truck began to approach me, so I popped my hood and pretended to be confused. He told me to leave or else he would call the cops. Tossing the pills in the back seat, I drove to the nearest gas station and called my friend for a ride. The next morning, I went to my second job and got to get my last paycheck. I left a note on the windshield of my former manager's car explaining the previous night. I went home and received a call from him. He told me to come back, no pressure. He just wanted to talk. Little did I know there were two Monroe County Sheriff deputies waiting for me. As soon as I left, two more showed up to my house, questioning my mom. They were minutes away from putting out a missing person alert. Luckily, they found me before I even made it halfway there. A New York State trooper pulled me over on 490 West. I was doing 91 and a 55, flashing my brights at the car in front of me in the passing lane. He yanked me out of my car and slammed me onto the hood of his car, placing me in handcuffs for the first time in my life. I sat in the back of his cruiser, crying, cussing, confused. He explained to me that a deputy was on his way with my mom so my car wouldn't be impounded. From there, they transferred handcuffs and I was officially placed under mental hygiene arrest. I spent 6 nights in a psychiatric ward at Rochester General Hospital where I was diagnosed with bipolar 1 disorder. Everything started making sense. The antidepressants I had been taking were actually worsening my symptoms. I was put on a number of new medications, one of them I still take to this day. Those sick nights were pretty miserable. The majority of the other patients walked up and down the halls talking to themselves, while I spent the time playing cards with a kid that was close to my age. When I was released, I went back to work. However, I couldn't handle it. The side effects from the new medications made it almost impossible to function. For a few weeks, I couldn't even speak properly. I eventually quit and fell into a deep, deep depression, the polar opposite of the manic state I had been in for a couple months before. For roughly 7 months, I hardly got out of bed as I patiently waited for a prescribed bipolar antidepressant to kick in. Although I burned many bridges that I knew could never be rebuilt, there's many that I have, and there's always new bridges under construction. I know that I crash and burn, but I've learned something over the past several years. No matter how hard I fall, I will always get back up and keep fighting. I am resilient, a quality that enables me to bounce back from any amount of pain and suffering. If I can save one person's life from this experience, I've done my job. Be conscious of your words and actions. Be kind to one another. You never know the battles somebody might be fighting on the inside. It took some time, but eventually I got back on my feet. I learned how to be a server and increased my front of house skills at an Uno's pizzeria. During this time, I started planning out my next move. I had realized that my career path had been with me this entire time that I was searching elsewhere. I applied and was accepted to the Culinary Institute of America in Hyde Park, New York, about a 4 hour drive from home. It kind of felt like a comical movie where the main character is just a little bit older than his classmates. I met so many different people, and a few that I still remain close with to this day. I learned so many new skills, techniques, and types of cuisines. I received good grades in most of my classes. Unfortunately, about a year and a half into the program, about 90% of my class failed our second term practical that granted us permission to begin our externships. I had applied and been accepted to a one Michelin star restaurant in San Francisco called Murad. I was given a second chance to retake my practical, proctored by the same miserable chef who had failed me. I failed my retake by 3 points. As I stepped out of the kitchen, I descended a flight of about 10 concrete steps under a clear night sky. By the time I had reached the bottom, it was a torrential downpour. I have never experienced such an event in my life. My confidence in myself, which had been so high, plummeted below the surface and took years to return. I couldn't do it any longer. For the third time in my life, I chose to give up. Brick wall. That 4 hour drive home felt like 4 days and was extremely humbling. I returned to work at the Bees for my second campaign, but left within a year as a kitchen manager position opened up at a wood fire pizza place, accompanied with a late night bar. I worked there for almost 2 years and continued to push myself to gain more experience. I learned how to hire and fire people with the owner, how to take inventory, place the weekly delivery, and lead a small team of cooks through the weeds. Unfortunately, I was treated quite poorly by the owner and eventually put in my 2 weeks' notice. One of my cooks had taken note of how unfairly I had been treated and the insane amount of stress I was under. He suggested that I work over at the University of Rochester through a temp agency as a cook. I was hired in quickly, and they realized I was quite a bit overqualified. It was such a breath of fresh air. Instead of being miserable, I was able to just show up and cook, clean up, and go home. Life was tough financially, but I was beyond happy. Within 2 months, the COVID-19 pandemic caught us all by surprise. Once we were cleared to return to work, I was offered a position as a supervisor, which I gladly took. Within a couple years, I was able to laterally switch to a sous chef position, teamed up with a few others who are in even more student debt than I am. Things had finally started to pan out, and nothing can describe the feeling of realizing I made it out of the dark. The light began to shine, and my confidence returned. Over the past 4 years here, I have gained more knowledge and leadership skills than at any other point in my life. I have the honor and privilege to work amongst over 100 other chefs, managers, unionized cooks, cashiers, and dishwashers across 4 different locations on campus. I walk into work every day with my head held high as I greet my team of about 25 brilliant individuals I directly lead to success on a daily basis. I am respected, I am a leader, and I am loved. I often forget my roots. I have blocked out so many of the painful memories that once plagued my existence. In the past 9 years, I have never once returned to the hospital. I have beaten the odds and I am winning. Although terrifying, I have learned to embrace the uncertainty in life. I have come so far. I have climbed so many mountains. I have divided and conquered just to keep up with you all. It is exhausting, it is challenging, and it is beyond rewarding. I thrive off the sunrises, the sunsets, and everything in between. I am so proud of the man that I have become today. I guess that quote on Mr. Hargrave's chalkboard proved to be true. The harder you fall, the higher you bounce. For myself, it seems to have been a handful of falls and brick walls, each of them seeming more complex than the rest. My message to you all is simple. Just keep on bouncing. Never forget that you are in control of yourself. You might not like the life that you are currently living, and that's okay. But this is the one you're currently winning at, isn't it?
Thank you so much, Alex.
Welcome.
All right.